Jennifer Bird. I am a biblical scholar, and I happen to care a great deal about what people do with what they find in the Bible. This video is showing up in a playlist called Does the Bible Tell You So?, where I address topics or things that people want to know. Well, what does the Bible say about that? Or does the Bible actually say X, Y, and Z? So this is in that series, and what I'm doing is kind of a subset within that series, if you will. I'm addressing topics that I think are important to the conversation about marriage in the Bible, or biblical marriage, or even, if you really, marriage equality in the United States, if not in other parts of the world. Because what people think the Bible says ends up impacting how legislation plays out, even for people who don't grow up within a Jewish or Christian context. So it's actually important to talk about what the Bible does and does not say about this relationship we today call marriage. Thus, the book's title is Marriage in the Bible, What Do the Texts Say? So this video is on chapter 6, Matriarchs, Patriarchs, Laws, and Adultery. And I hope you can see why they relate to this topic. I want to clarify something, and that is the first 4 chapters of the book are addressing the very short passages that, at least within a Christian context, people turn to say, this is what I mean by what marriage should be. And so I address those passages on their own. The rest of the book is looking at things within the Bible that also have a bearing on the relationships we call marriage. Or, for instance, in this chapter, what kinds of relationship dynamics are being modeled for people? What kinds of things, are in the ethos or in the worldview or in the realm of these people, and these examples are being set for you, right? And where does that lead people? What does that mean that people might expect or do in their own relationships? So let me explain a little bit more what I mean by that. So, for instance, the first section looks at the relationship between Abram and Sarah, and I think they are fodder for a lot of conversations, and I've talked about them elsewhere. But not just that, the question about whether they're half siblings. That's not what I want to talk about. What I want to talk about is what happens, right? When they go to Egypt, and he hands her over essentially to the Pharaoh. The text makes it clear that she has to go be with the Pharaoh. And he does this whether out of fear, whether out of not trusting God. I get a lot of pushback on that from students. They say, well, he's just not trusting God. I'm like, well, in Abraham's defense, he's only just now heard from this God, so give him a little break. They don't have a history yet. But what's happening there? It's not surprising to anyone that Abraham says, let's just pretend you're not actually my woman, and go in and do your thing with the Pharaoh. You'll protect me, and we'll be better off. And that happens, and she has absolutely zero voice in any of it. This is an ancient text, Dr. Bird, who cares? Well, actually I care, because lots of people do care, because of what's being said, what kind of a worldview, what kind of a culture allows that kind of a way of a relating to happen. So the issue with Abraham and Sarah in Egypt, maybe that's an extreme situation, but then you also have that whole thing going on with Hagar, who is an enslaved woman. She has no choice in the matter. I'm trying not to say the R word here, right? In order to produce children. And there are things being said and done in that relationship that we should expect from relationships at that point in time, or from that culture. And so I'm not trying to judge the culture or judge the ancient way of being. I'm trying to say, let's be really honest about how different that is than the way people tend to behave today. And let's make that clear, that we behave differently today. But if you keep turning to biblical texts that demonstrate that it's okay for a man to take the woman who lives in his house and have sex with her, right? Force himself upon her. Do you see there's something going on there that we need to be honest about. What if we look at the relationship of Rebecca and Isaac? There's a lot to talk about here. Their betrothal scene, if you will, is the longest in the Hebrew Bible. It's kind of the first one, and the others are kind of, diminutive of that. What's interesting, though, right, is Isaac doesn't go find his own woman. an enslaved person from their household goes to find her. He takes a nice load of goods to purchase her with, kind of a standard set of goods, linens and gold and silver jewelry and all kinds of interesting, beautiful things. And he procures her from her family. He goes home, and as soon as Isaac sees her, he takes her into his mother's tent and they have sex, and therefore they're married. That's how that worked. Questions of consent here, right? But also, perhaps even more so, given their story, is what happens in the more well-known part of their story, which is when you have this element of they have twins, right? Esau and Jacob and Rebekah team up against Esau and Isaac, right? Well, why? Why does that kind of a thing need to happen? Who is being deceived here? Why does anyone need to be deceptive or sneaky or tricky? And what does that set? What kind of a precedent does that set? Why is it that a woman feels the need to be sneaky and deceive her own husband, in this case, with the language we would use for that relationship as husband and wife? That I don't like that. I don't like that precedent for any children or teenagers looking at relationship dynamics. I'd much rather there be able to be communication about what's going on here, and let's talk it out in terms of which son is going to get the blessing. So there are all kinds of cultural expectations. I get that. But to say that you should expect women to be deceitful or deceptive, look at this play out. Yeah, let's talk about why she needed to be deceptive. The culture she lived in, the male as the making all the decisions, right? All kinds of dynamics within that setting first that make it necessary for a woman to be sneaky in that setting. But the focus then ends up being on the woman being sneaky, and she tricked, and she and Jacob teamed up, and all this kind of deceptiveness. And I don't know about you, but I don't find that helpful in family relationships. Deception, sneakiness, that's a relationship I'd rather stay away from. But it's one of the primary patriarch-matriarch dynamics, right? I think it's important to be clear that this kind of, part of what the stories are telling us is this is what women end up doing when they don't have a voice. They end up being sneaky. Let's look at what that shows us about certain types of dynamics, right? A patriarchal framework that doesn't let a woman have say in her own life or what's happening with her children or all of those kinds of things. And maybe find a way to not have that be a part of relationships anymore, instead of perpetuating the patriarchal dominant framework that backs people, partners, into such corners, right? But it's there as a precedent. It's there as an example. And people who read these texts unquestioningly are able to take in parts of them, even if they say that's not what they want for their relationships. You're still being informed by this kind of a dynamic and this kind of a framework. Then the next set of relationships would be Jacob then and the two sisters that he ends up procuring, and the two women who are enslaved to those two sisters, who all then become the women who produce the boys, the sons, who become the heads of the tribes of Israel, right? And there's a lot to be said going on here in terms of biblical precedent, what's being, what kinds of dynamics are allowed in relationships. Big question about consent for the women, in my opinion. Certainly, even for Rachel and Leah, but also Bilhah and Zilpah. We need to talk about that, right? They were essential to the creating of the tribes of Israel, or the heads of the tribes of Israel. Who even knows their names? Bilhah and Zilpah, right? Do we care that was forced upon them? And here's the thing. Instead of, let me read one of the text boxes, actually the text box from this chapter titled Origins. Instead of lightheartedly dismissing the fact that Jacob has two sister wives and 2 enslaved women as the mothers of his children, note if it changes the way you think about this group of people if you take seriously this story about their origins. So for people of faith who've always just kind of thought about it as this thing that happens and that's just the way it goes, think about it in a different context. What if you heard about a different group of people and that was their origin story? Was the patriarch, right, had 2 women at the same time, and then he was also having sex with 2 of the slaves in their house to produce these children, and they attributed the children of the enslaved women essentially to the women they belonged to. So it was just the Rachel and Leah were producing these children, right? Is that going to change the way you think about that group of people if that's part of their origin story? Will you think about them differently? It does for me. I'm not proud of that, not at all, but it did when I would try to think that through, what that looks like to someone outside of this system. That's a helpful thing to think about, right? So I think that's an important thing that people are often just kind of taught to make sense of or dismiss and not pay attention to. These ancient texts are showing us an ancient worldview and ancient ways of thinking and doing and being. And if we're not careful, we will continue to play out some of those dynamics in our current realities unless we are thoughtful about what it is we're reading and taking in and perpetuating. Okay, so that's the matriarchs and patriarchs part. Then there's the laws and adultery part of this chapter. So what I wanted to do then next is to read, just briefly kind of go over, when I read through Exodus, Leviticus, and Deuteronomy, looking for the laws related to marriages in some way, shape, or form, okay? And that means anything to do with men and women in relationships. So the thing is, I think it's helpful to note that there are 3 laws about adultery specifically, and they are repeated twice. So it shows up in Exodus and Leviticus, these 3, and then those 3 then are repeated in Deuteronomy, which should be expected because that's what deuteronomos means, second law, second time through of the law. So, there's a command not to commit adultery in the 10 Commandments. There's a command not to covet with the implication of it being potentially leading to adultery. And then there's a command to kill both offenders, and then that's repeated in Deuteronomy. That's the laws on adultery specifically. But then there are these other laws that are kind of related, but not, so I have a category called laws on marriage because we call it marriage. They didn't really have a label marriage the way we do. And so there are just 6 or 7 or 8 laws, how to handle the women and children who belong to your enslaved man, when a man seduces a virgin not engaged to be taken yet, what to do when on taking foreign women. And notice I'm using the verb take, not marry, because that's what it was in the Hebrew, was take. Priests must not take a prostitute or other defiled woman. Priests must only take virgins, no defiled women. That's in there twice, just to make sure. Kings should not acquire many wives, or their hearts will turn away. Same is said about valuable possessions. Go mark your territory or your property before going to battle. So if you've already put down the down payment on a woman, make sure you go enjoy her before you go off to battle, because you might die and then someone else will come take her. And if you haven't already put your seed in her or marked her as your territory, then the children she gives are going to go to a different family. I mean, it's very interesting how territorial this whole thing is, right? So, and then there's a table of laws on men handling their property. And what I mean by that is, for instance, when you sell your daughter into sex slavery. So your daughter is your property, and you can do with her what you need to perhaps settle a debt or something like that, right? If a daughter of a priest profanes her father by prostituting herself, think that one through for a minute. You're to burn her to death. What to do when you think your woman cheated on you? And very, very interesting and horrific passage in Numbers chapter 5. how to handle distributing inheritance to your two sons, one from the woman you like and one from the woman you dislike. Very interesting, actually, nod towards being fair, which is really kind of funny. And you can probably see how that is actually still relevant to today. How to get rid of a woman you find objectionable in some way. I mean, these are laws. These are things that are laid out. And then there are other laws related to men having sex. And that is to men having sex with women that aren't already their property. And that is essentially what we see in Leviticus 18 and 20, a whole bunch of laws telling hetero men not to have sex with all these women he's related to, right? As well as that one line about lying with a male as you lie with a woman. A man shall not take his father's woman. It's all, but part of the point here is the laws will highlight for us, right, how they thought about bodies, women specifically, as property, as territory, right? How, the laws around behavior were obviously focused on men, but also highlighted that women were property. I'm going to say that again and again because I don't know. It's hard to know if people are actually processing the extent of what I mean there, right? Women are property. All kinds of things going on there, right? The issues about adultery or the laws around it are not about protecting family bonds. They're not about saying that, by the way, the Hebrew Bible actually allows for divorce, which is worth noting. But what the laws also say about bodies and sex is really powerful and tends to just ride right under the surface instead of getting interrogated, right? Which is the focus of sex is that a man does it, a woman receives it, or an inferior receives it from him, and it's his way of claiming her. And it's all about seeing a woman as territory. So in writing this book, I had to figure out ways to kind of essentialize some of the points I'm trying to make, or some of the things that are just kind of bugging me. And so I wanted to read one paragraph from this chapter on this idea of what's going on for women, or what's going on in this biblical, and this applies to both testaments, not just the Hebrew Bible, but what's going on in terms of adultery within these biblical texts and narratives. Let me read two paragraphs. So I'm going to read starting on page 122. People will suggest that the main issue in relation to adultery was that of inheritance concerns. A man wanted to be sure that the son he was passing his inheritance along to was actually the fruit of his own loins, if you will. I absolutely get and respect that this was in the mix. But I also think we are kidding ourselves if we ignore that it was just as much about men's egos. When the laws say that a woman was to be pure on the day that she was passed along from her father's house to that of the man she now belongs to, this is territorial. This is about conquest and believing that they alone have known this woman. Consider this. What is ultimately an issue of what happens in a woman's uterus, right, whose child is gestating there, for inheritance reasons, ends up being discussed in terms of what happens in her vagina and with whom. The same is true if the issue is that of wanting to be the first man on the scene. The vagina as a means to the uterus, hang with me here, or as space to be conquered, becomes essentialized in this whole process. A woman is labeled according to what has and has not happened in her vagina. She is deemed pure or impure based on how a man has interacted with this part of her body. I feel like I need to make a t-shirt using the element in there that is so true and powerful, and I'm not sure I can make it fit on a t-shirt. Right? The vagina as a means to the uterus, or as space to be conquered, becomes essentialized in this whole process. A woman is labeled according to what has and has not happened in her vagina. I mean, that's worth the price of admission, right? Matriarchs, patriarchs, laws, and adultery. The examples that are set, the laws that are made, the things that are allowable, these are not so far removed from the way many people still think about it today. I think that's important to talk about. I think that's important to be aware of and to look at examples of where that comes from so that you can find a way to break the cycle, right? And as always, if you find anything useful in what I'm offering here or in any of my other videos, I hope you will like those videos and subscribe to my channel, and maybe even pass along a link or two to a friend or two. And there are other ways that you can support me that are listed in the description to this video. Lots of ways. So thanks, and I'll see you next time.